We have now come to the highlight of the conference, a dialogue with our guest of honor. It gives me great pleasure to invite Mr. Chee Tat, Minister for National Development, and our moderator, Mr. Shane Pereira, Research Associate at IPS, on stage for the dialogue session. Minister and Mr. Pereira, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this dialogue session. This morning we had quite a rigorous reflection on how far we've come as a cohesive, multiracial and multi-religious society. But more importantly, I think we are reflecting a lot upon where we go from here. And for today's dialogue, we'd like to welcome Minister, who will be helping us think through and to share his thoughts on these issues that were discussed this morning on social cohesion. Minister, I believe you have prepared some opening remarks for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane, and very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to join you here today. I just wanted to maybe start off with some brief opening remarks, and then after that we can have an exchange. I'll probably take some questions from Shane, and also look forward to taking some questions from all of you. Singapore has come a long way, as Shane said, since our independence 60 years ago, in building a society where people of all races and religions can work, can live, can progress together. Multiracialism has been a key pillar of our national identity. Our insistence on a multiracial society was one of the key reasons why we separated from Malaysia in 1965. We want a country where all Singaporeans are treated equally and everyone has a place regardless of race, language, or religion. By designing our policies around this core principle, we have been able to foster stronger social cohesion and build greater resilience as a nation. In today's more turbulent world, I'll put to you that because social media and external forces can now more easily divide societies, our commitment to multiracialism actually helps us in a more important way to stay united. And this is an asset for Singapore because it enables us to build a high-trust society. And trust is something that is very valuable, even more valuable today than before. However, we must not take our current cohesion and stability as a given and assume that it will always stay this way. We just have to leave it be. We switch to autopilot, and it will automatically continue to be like that. I think that is a dangerous assumption. We should not make that assumption. Every generation of Singaporeans must therefore continue to uphold and renew our commitment to building a multiracial society and to further enhance our racial and religious harmony. Race and religion remain sensitive issues that must be managed carefully. We have developed different policies to serve as guardrails, to strengthen cohesion and to prevent divisions from taking root. And these include what I will call preventive measures, which encourage social mixing and interaction, as well as some tough enforcement powers to deal with incidents that could threaten our racial and religious harmony, because these incidents can happen and do happen from time to time. The guardrails are not meant to be constraints to hold us back or to tie us down. Look at them more as safeguards. Safeguards that we can continue to help us to make progress as one united people. That we will stay together while we move ahead as a country. And as Minister Shanmugam shared in Parliament earlier this month, we must also guard against the rise of identity politics and to avoid mixing race and religion with politics. In many countries around the world, we have seen how such divisions can play out. When people are mobilized along racial, religious, or identity lines, the societies then become more polarized. Trust erodes, and in the end, no one benefits. Minority communities will be impacted more badly in such situations. It will severely undermine our racial and religious harmony, which we have spent several decades to build up. So we must never allow this to happen in Singapore. Our politics must aim to unite, not divide. And our politics must always serve the interests of Singaporeans and not foreigners who try to intervene and interfere in our domestic affairs. We must continue to strengthen our foundation of trust so that we can keep Singapore as a fair, just, and cohesive society, not just for this generation, but for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Minister. I think you mentioned that it's been 60 years since our nation building, and we've constantly or repeatedly shown that we can meet the challenges of social cohesion. I'm wondering, Minister, if you could share a little bit more about what the approach that Singapore took all those 60 years ago, and how it continues to be relevant today. I think you mentioned the EIP as a guardrail as well. And given some conversations about, or maybe we should move beyond these kinds of guardrails or preventive measures, do you think, what else has the government put in place in terms of these guardrails, and do you think they are still relevant today?
Thank you, Shane. I think that's a good question to start with. So this concept of a multicultural Singapore is not something that only started in 1965. It existed before that. But in those earlier years, because we were a colony, and we have a multi-ethnic society. We have immigrants as well. We are a nation of immigrants. But what the British did was that they use an approach where communities are sort of separated. There was limited integration, socially, geographically, economically, between the different races. Communities largely lived, worked, and studied within their own areas. But then later, when we became part of Malaysia, we tried to reconcile some of these differing beliefs about racial identity. And what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and our founding generation of leaders tried to do is, because they believe very strongly that for Singapore to survive and to prosper, we have to be a truly multiracial society. So this concept that they propose, a Malaysian Malaysia, didn't go down very well with the UMNO leaders. They believe that regardless of race, language, or religion, everyone must have equal opportunities to be able to succeed and to thrive. Malaysia's approach is a different one, as we know, and that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is one of the key reasons why we had to split in 1965 from Malaysia. But our founding fathers, after Singapore became independent 60 years ago, held firmly to this belief, this principle of equality for all races, and that every citizen, regardless of race, should have equal rights and opportunity. And this is something I would say has become a key pillar of our Singapore identity. I'll even describe it as part of our social DNA. It is what today, one of the defining characteristics and feature of what it means to be Singaporean. We believe in multiracialism. We believe in this idea that this is a country not just for one race, but for all of us as Singaporeans. And as Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said in 1965, we're going to be a multiracial nation in Singapore. We will set an example. His famous quote, this one I'm sure many of us have heard it before. This is not a Malay nation. This is not a Chinese nation. This is not an Indian nation. Everyone will have his place equal. Language, culture, religion. So since independence, multiracialism has continued to be a key foundation for us. And we try to embed this very important principle, this value, in our laws, in our policies, in our day-to-day interactions amongst Singaporeans. We have 4 official languages, right? We have English, we have Malay, we have Tamil, we have Chinese. And if you look at Singapore, unlike many other countries in Asia, we decided to pick English as the working language in government and business. Whereas in many other parts of Asia, the working language in government and in business will be the language of the majority race. So this is something which is not natural, and it's not something that also happened naturally. In fact, as Mr. Lee shared in one of his writings, there were Chinese community leaders who went to lobby him soon after 1965 to say, since the Chinese form the majority in Singapore, why don't you make Chinese language the language of government and business? And Mr. Lee gave them a flat no, because that will run contrary to our key value, our key principle of multiracialism. And if we had done that, I think Singapore would be a very different country today. And the way we have designed our society to promote racial harmony, and where we not suppress our differences, but we embrace our differences, I think has made us more resilient as a people, because we had to learn along the way how to have give and take, how to understand one another better, how to learn to appreciate one another's cultures, traditions. And in this more globalized environment, more fast-moving, more international environment, actually what we have done over the decades now have become a strength for our society. It can enable Singapore society to now be more resilient, more nimble, more adaptable to this new global environment. Just now you mentioned, Shane, about the ethnic integration policy, or EIP. This is something which can be quite controversial. We are mindful that because in Singapore, public housing is home to the large majority of Singaporeans. More than 80% stay in public housing. We don't apply EIP to private properties, but for public housing, we impose this requirement whereby we make sure that in a particular block or a particular precinct, you do not end up with more than a certain percentage, a certain limit of a particular ethnic group. So these percentages are set not exactly the same as the proportions in our population. So Chinese, for example, is about 75% of our population. We don't set the EIP limit for Chinese at 75. There's some buffer. The same applies to Indians and to Malays. There's some buffer given. But we don't want a situation whereby in certain estates, certain blocks, you end up with, say, for example, 99% Chinese. Because what it means is that there will be too few minorities in that block. And by definition, because the population will have to spread elsewhere, in some other blocks, in some other precincts, there will be concentration of too many minorities of a particular race. So this is something which has its trade-offs. I must be open. There are trade-offs. It is not a cost-free policy. When we do this, the benefit we get would be you ensure that every precinct, every block will have some mix of different ethnic groups, and through that process, we hope that there will be more social interaction and mixing, including in the playgrounds, in the hawker centers, in the kopitiams. If people stay apart in different communities, those interactions then become fewer, and the opportunities to then make friends in the playground, in school, at the hawker centers where we can sit down together, have a cup of coffee together, have breakfast together, those opportunities will become fewer. And we want to avoid that. But the cost of doing this is you do impose some restrictions, especially when people try to sell their flat. Buying is okay, because when you buy from HDB, you apply, we set aside. In fact, in some instances where, because we set aside the quota, and there are fewer applicants from a particular ethnic group, it may also actually, in some cases, end up giving us sort of a slight advantage in terms of your balloting chances. Not the price, but balloting chances. But when you sell, it is true that if you have reached the EIP limits, you can't sell to a particular race anymore. It will restrict who you can sell to. Okay, so the most common appeals that we get in MND and HDB will be those whereby a minority family will want to sell their flat to a Chinese family, because most of the buyers, given our population profile, will be Chinese. So they will prefer that, because then they can have more possible buyers to buy the flats from them. But if the limits have not been reached, it's fine. But if the limits have been reached for the Chinese population in that block or that precinct, and we don't set a restriction, then there will be insufficient mixing. But if you set the restriction, then what it means is for that family who is at the boundary facing this EIP restriction, it is more difficult for them to sell. It is more difficult for them to sell because there will be fewer buyers. Okay, so this is something which has its trade-offs, and that's why some years ago, a few years ago, MND recognized that there was this trade-off, and we introduced a scheme whereby government would buy back the flat from the flat owner in cases whereby you are unable to sell even after trying for quite some time. So you must demonstrate that you are, I mean, it's not automatic, you have to demonstrate that you have tried, but if after trying you are unable to do it, the government will provide this sort of safety net, this fallback option, whereby we will buy the flat, HDB will buy the flat back from the flat owner in those situations. Okay, so this is something which, like many other policies, it's not without its trade-offs. But we thought about it, and we feel that despite the restrictions and the inconveniences and the trade-offs that this EIP policy present, on balance, it is still important for us to uphold this as a very important part of ensuring that there's sufficient mixing across different ethnic groups. So it's a conscious policy trade-off that we have made to say that something which we do want to constantly look at and see how we can find ways to mitigate the downsides. But don't forget that this policy has an important objective in mind too. And if we completely do away with it, yes, you do away with all the restrictions, you remove all the restrictions, but you also then remove the benefit and the objective that this policy is trying to achieve. So that's something which we have to be quite careful, we have to think through very carefully, and weigh the pros and cons very, very carefully. There are other policies that we have made along the way, yeah? And sometimes some of these are, I would say, innovations to our system to ensure that we prevent certain outcomes, undesirable outcomes. Okay, I'll give you two examples. One is GRC, the other one is the reserve presidency. The GRC system is designed to ensure that there will definitely be sufficient minority representation in Parliament. And no political party that only appeals to a particular ethnic group and not to all different ethnic groups will be able to succeed and do well in Singapore. Because if you only appeal to one particular group, you will not be able to attract sufficient number of minority candidates to fill in GRCs to be able to win power. So this is something which, again, has its trade-offs. It's not without trade-offs, but you have to look at both the pluses and the minuses and decide in the end as a society whether we want to preserve some of these guardrails to prevent the bad outcomes, whereby you end up with a situation where you have an over-representation of the majority race in Parliament and inadequate representation of minorities in Parliament. The reserve presidency is another example. This again is a guardrail. It only kicks in if there are, after a certain period of time, no president from a particular ethnic group that is elected through the elected presidency process. Then this reserve presidency safeguard, this guardrail will kick in. But if an individual is elected based on his or her own merit without going through a reserve election, that means in an open election, then actually this guardrail may not be necessary. And so that's something which, like some of the other guardrails that I mentioned, they are not designed to be constraints that hold us back, but they are designed as safeguards, as guardrails to protect against an undesirable outcome. So someone said, if in future we no longer need these guardrails because race is becoming less of an issue and we are making progress as a society, I don't think we are there yet, but I think we have made good progress over the last 60 years. And if we continue to make progress, there will come a time when race may not be so important, may not even matter anymore. Then these guardrails, then in those situations, would not then become constraints anymore. So if you take the reserve presidency, for example, if an individual can be elected in an open election, then the reserve presidency mechanism then need not kick in. Okay, so that's something which I think we should still strive to work towards, but recognize that in the meantime, we are not there yet. So we do need the guardrails to help us to be able to move towards that outcome, that ideal outcome. But without the guardrails now, if you remove all the guardrails now, the risk that we take is that you may not reach that ideal, you may reach another landing point, which is far from ideal and even worse than where we are now. So I think that is the important trade-off that we have to bear in mind. It is not an easy question to answer because it involves a lot of judgment call and an accurate assessment of where we are now. But I will put to you that if you think about some of these policies as guardrails and not limitations and constraints, and if one day we no longer need them, I think that will be good for our society as a whole.
Thank you, Minister. So from what I hear is basically the government has in place quite a lot of policies to kind of mitigate certain important issues, but also trying to deal with the cost that may come out. And I think moving away from the tools, this morning we had this panel discussion and presented some findings from the Race, Religion, Language study. And there's some reasons for optimism. For example, there's very strong support still among Singaporeans for a multiracial society. They feel that our race and religious harmony has gone up and remains quite strong, but also highlights quite a few challenges that are quite pressing and will come up in the future. For example, shrinking social circles, divergent perceptions between class and race, and even feelings of discrimination at work. And with that, then, I wonder, Minister, if you could tell us some of the challenges that you foresee coming up, and maybe what are some of the government's plans to address them?
I would say there are, in my mind, at least two. Probably there are more, but in my mind, I think the two most salient ones to me. One would be, because now social media has, become a lot more common, and in fact, for many people, that is the main source of news and information that they get. And on social media, the risk is that there can be a lot of false or misleading information. And now with AI, deep fake and things like that, sometimes you don't even know whether that thing that you're watching and it's is real or not. So I think it's important for us in such an environment to have new safeguards to protect ourselves. Just now in my opening remarks, I mentioned that some of these could be preventive, some of it could be enforcement. So preventive could include the need for us to then be more discerning, to ask questions, to check, and not take at face value what is being sent to us or what we receive as necessarily being true. So a more questioning attitude, fact check, verify, before we know and accept whether something is true or not true. Or worse, before we even forward to our friends and say, hey, see, this is what's happening, then you help to spread and contribute to the fake news. The other thing I thought is important is also for us to emphasize the important role of trusted sources. So like, where do you go for information to verify? There must be some trusted sources that people can rely on, whether is it the mainstream media, whether is it credible institutions like IPS. I think people need some trusted sources in this very complex, very diverse world that we live in, that they can turn to if they are unsure. So we do need to invest, I think, in building up some of these new capabilities, new guardrails. And enforcement as well, I think we shouldn't kid ourselves. There will be bad actors, whether now or in the future, who will want to manipulate, who will want to make use of these tools like social media, deepfake, to create mischief and sometimes to purposely stir trouble. And we do need tough laws to protect our people against such actions. The POFMA is one example. FICA is another one to prevent foreign interference. So we do need new laws. We do need to put in place some of these new capabilities as well to put a stop to the actions of these bad actors. Then I think also, if you look at it, the other one that we need to pay attention to is it's not just the traditional social fault lines like race, like religion, that could divide people. You sort of alluded to it, Shen, that there are also new fault lines that we need to watch out for. Income and wealth divide, if we're not careful, could become a new split in society. And the relationship between locals and new immigrants, who some of them are here to work, study, but later on may become PRs and citizens. How do we help them to understand Singapore society better? How do we integrate them better? How do we also allow Singaporeans to get to know them better, make friends, deepen our understanding and our relationships with one another? I think those are new challenges that we need to deal with. It's a very dynamic situation. You have old traditional fault lines that we are making progress, and we are moving towards what I think all of us would want to land on in future, which is a post-racial society. But at the same time, there are new fault lines that could pull us apart if we're not careful. And I think so this whole thing about managing social cohesion is something that we must continue to focus on. And that is why when PM launched the Forward Singapore movement, we emphasize that a very key part of that is to strengthen our social compact among Singaporeans. And this social compact can cut across traditional fault lines like race, religion, but can also cover some of these more emerging fault lines that I mentioned.
Thanks, Minister. Thank you, Minister. I think with that, let's move to our learned Singaporean leaders who are in the audience. Just for the Q&A, I'd like to remind you that there are 4 mics throughout the room, 2 in the front and 2 at the back. Please go to the mic if you want to ask a question. Say your name and your designation, and then ask the question in a succinct manner. For those who have disabilities and need help, you can actually notify one of our staff or the ushers, and they can bring the mic to you. Yes?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Minister, and good morning, everyone again. I'd just like to ask, I'm just sharing, first of all, my observation. My name is Sharifah, by the way, and I'm representing my institution, educational institution, which is Madrasah Al-Ma'arif Al-Islamiyah. I teach general paper in that school. My class, as I was explaining to the members of the audience, is like a microcosm of Singapore. I have Chinese, I have an Indian national who is becoming naturalized, I have Malay, I have Arab in my class. It's a small class, but we are a microcosm of Singapore. And one of the things that we encounter when we are discussing about Singapore is this inevitable framework in which our society functions, and how government, all right, which you are a representative of, in which how our society is governed. And that framework is the CMIO framework. And I've got no issues with the CMIO framework, because I do believe, as part of multiculturalism, we need to recognize each other's differences, and being able to identify yourself with a race is very important, because it also preserves our history and our culture. But one of the issues with CMIO is this, inevitably, we have this phenomenon of majority and minority. And some of the problems that you mentioned about EIP and all that stems from this interplay between the majority and the minority. I want to ask the government, because you mentioned earlier that you're looking forward, the government is looking forward to a time when there is a post-racial society. How is it that we can have, or we can arrive at this, and what kind of a society does the government see as being post-racial? Because if you're looking at, new fault lines, the fault lines that you mentioned about income differences and all that, I see that as moving beyond race already. So we're already entering that territory. But the old issues still remain. So it can be like, things are being stacked up, one on top of the other. So my concern is, to what extent, all right, is the racial makeup of Singapore, the current ratio that we have, to what extent is that still sacred for the government? Because the way I see it, if we can have a more equal number among the races, I think some of the problems that we are encountering inevitably is because of the numbers, all right? Some of these problems would actually start to resolve themselves. That's what I see. So this is what I'd like to hear from the minister. What kind of post-racial societies the government envisions, and whether that involves, all right, something to do with this majority and minority makeup of our society.
Thank you. Thank you. I understand this morning Mr. Janadas Devan gave a speech at this forum. And I think one of the things that he said was that you cannot get unity by suppressing differences. Would you like to have a seat, madam? Yeah, thank you very much. You cannot get unity by suppressing differences. And he also mentioned that we are not aiming to go for a melting pot society. And instead, what we are trying to do is to look at how we can allow each group, whether religious group, ethnic group, to continue to celebrate your unique traditions, heritage, and allow those to thrive. But at the same time, remember that we do have a common identity, a Singaporean national identity, and we do have the common spaces that we want to enhance and we want to expand and deepen. So I think I agree with Janadas that I think that is the approach that we want to take. So by saying that, race no longer is a factor, we are all the same, I think that is not very likely to happen. So when I say when we work towards a post-racial society, I think what I meant is what we have in our pledge, which is regardless of race, language, or religion. So yes, we recognize that we may come from different racial groups, we may have different religions, we may speak different languages, but regardless of that, we are still united as Singaporeans. We are still united as one people. So I think that's something which, I don't know if you agree, Sharifah, but from my point of view, I think it will be quite difficult given the differences in the practices for religion, for example, and in ethnic cultures, languages, to say that it doesn't matter and there's only sort of, because it's not the same, right? And we certainly do not want to move towards this melting pot society whereby we take everything and then we put it together and then we blend it and say, come up with something that is common. Because that thing that is common, there are only two possibilities. It's either you come up with something which is a bit like a blended product, so you think about it, it's not, because sometimes we use the word rojak to describe our society, right? So we say, okay, you have the different ingredients, and the ingredients are kept intact, and then we use the secret sauce, the rojak sauce, that binds everything together, bring all the ingredients together. So that's our concept of a rojak society. The blended society is like milkshake, right? You put everything in, and you put into a blender, and then you blend it, and then you come up with this gooey mess of all the things mashed up together, blended together, but that thing doesn't resemble any of the original ingredients. And I don't think that's what we want. We also do not want to become like the French, for example, because they say that, okay, you can come from different religious, ethnic backgrounds, but as long as you subscribe to the French identity, that's okay, and you can only do that. Okay, that's the most important. But what they mean by French identity, to be quite direct about it, is the white Anglo-Saxon French identity. That's what they mean, right? They don't mean the minority identity mixed together with the French, what they call the French identity. So that's also not a good model, where you just take the identity and the culture of the majority. In this case, in France, would be the whites, the French people, and then you impose that as the ideal for everybody to subscribe to. So I think there are these difficult trade-offs, Sharifa, that we have to think through, that the starting point is that the different religions, different ethnic groups are quite different. It's not even same but different. It is really quite different in some instances, quite different. But it doesn't mean that therefore we cannot find common ideals, common values, common spaces, common interests that we can all subscribe to and we can help to bind us together. I think that is what I mean by, or what I hope we can achieve by a post-racial society. Not to suppress our differences or to pretend that there are no differences, but to say that regardless of those differences, we are one united people.
Can I just comment? Because
Yes, please.
when you say regardless of race, right, I think we need to change that to be with regard to race, language, and religion. Because every time we say regardless of race, we are actually disregarding those differences. So in the spirit of celebrating our differences, I think we need to take into consideration and celebrate them for it's with regard to race, language, and religion, not regardless.
Thank you. I'm not a GP teacher, so I won't argue with you.
Thank you.
Test. All right, perfect. Right, good afternoon, Minister, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Taro. Currently, I'm a student at Nanyang Polytechnic, Community Development, and I'm also a youth advocate with OnePeople.sg and a member of IRO Youth Wing. So actually, I got two questions, or more of 2.5, I guess. Yeah, so the first question is with reference to the study that Mr. Matthews actually went through, and that is regarding the platforms in engaging and understanding different ethnic and religious backgrounds. So I think one of the key things that I saw is actually that social media was ranked at 32% in terms of engagement platform. And this is despite in recent times there having an increased usage of social media as a whole. And also we are seeing examples of local social media platforms that is actually encouraging engagement or promoting certain different diverse communities that we have, such as our Grandfather Story, Rice Media, and We Are Majula as well. And so my question is, first question is, what collaborative strategies or approaches could be promoted or adopted between the government body, digital platforms or groups such as OGS or Rice Media, and community groups such as NGOs, civic groups, grassroots, to encourage intercultural dialogue and understanding of digital spaces, especially in the near future. And the second question is a bit more of your personal perspective, and that is, having served in public service and politics for quite a long time, not too long, but quite a long time, including as Principal Private Secretary to the late Mr. Lee, do you foresee elements of identity or polarizing politics? I mean, based on the previous statement by Minister Shanmugam, do you foresee elements of identity or polarizing politics becoming even more pronounced here in Singapore, to the level of trends that we are seeing in other countries, as Minister Shanmugam has pointed out previously, such as in Netherlands or in the United States, and particularly around ethnicity and faith. And in an increasingly polarized global climate, how can we further strengthen efforts to foster safe and open conversations that bridge multiple perspectives and backgrounds? Thank you.
Thank you. Two very good questions. The first one, I think certainly, if we can find platforms, social influencers that do share our same values of wanting to promote racial harmony, religious harmony, helping to unite society, bridge the differences, we will certainly be happy to work with them. And you are right, because social media is now used more pervasively, we need to be there. We need to be where people are getting their information, and we need to be able to then produce content that they will want to consume, they will want to share, and I think that's important. The government may not have all the best ideas necessarily in terms of how to get the message across to different groups. And that's why I think working closely with these different platforms is something that we will certainly be very open to doing so. You also mentioned about the risk of identity politics. So if I may just build on what you have mentioned. Indeed, if you see what's happening in other countries, it is worrying. Politically, it is expedient, convenient to go down that path because you can rile up people quite easily. I don't even need to necessarily give you good policy solutions. I just need to rile you up, stir you up by saying that I will fight for you because we are all of the same particular religion or ethnic group. It's very powerful because it appeals to certain very tribal instincts that we are working hard as a society over centuries to try and suppress through education, through laws, through all those different guardrails. But deep down inside, that element sometimes will still pop up from time to time. And so when people are feeling under siege, or they feel that the current situation is not desirable and they want change, and somebody comes along and promises them change along ethnic, religious lines, playing with identity politics, sometimes people may succumb to the temptation. It's very seductive. But the people who are doing this, the politicians who are doing this, are actually playing with fire. Because once you start going down this path, you can imagine, if you have a political system, political environment that encourages people to play identity politics, it will not stop with just one group appealing to one community. Because there will be other communities within that society that other politicians will say, well, if you can do it, so can I, right? I will follow what you do, but I will stir another group. And soon you will have a society whereby instead of this common space and a common identity that we want to work towards, and we want to enhance and deepen, you will end up with people just emphasizing their differences. Because you can't win in identity politics if you emphasize common space, if you talk about give and take, if you talk about how you work together to strengthen that larger common identity. You win by emphasizing the differences and making people feel vulnerable, under siege, and that's why you must support me because I will fight for you. So I think that's something which is, in the short term, maybe can be quite effective in some cases. So some politicians may succumb to that temptation to want to do it, but in the medium to longer term, it's very damaging to society because it is going to be a lose-lose for everybody if we go down that path. So I think we must do our best to prevent that. It's worse if it's mixed up with foreign interference, because, say, for example, if you take a country like Singapore, where you have countries outside of Singapore that groups in Singapore may have certain ethnic, cultural, or religious linkages to, and if we allow them to then interfere with our domestic affairs, with our domestic politics, you can imagine how dangerous and how complex that situation can be. So it's not just stirring by people within Singapore. If you're not careful, we allow this to happen. You also have stirring by people outside of Singapore, trying to influence us and trying to manipulate us. So we must not allow that to happen, and the only way to prevent that from happening is that all of us, and it's not just the government, all of us, the whole of society, we got to call these out when we see these things happening and put a stop to it. Send a clear message to all political parties that Singaporeans do not want such politics. And if anybody wants to engage in such politics, they will not succeed. Then I think that message is loud and clear, and all the political parties, regardless of whether you are the ruling party or the opposition, everybody will be clear. Don't play with fire, don't go down that path. Thank you.
I think it's even more pressing because with social media and the way that youth consume social media these days, right? That becomes quite a salient point. And I also think, well, the government, I can see some ministers, for example, doing TikTok dances and all these days. I'd be quite interested to probably do a study on how these youth consume and how they feel about this. So maybe that could be a route in, or or we can improve on that kind of communication.
Yes, yes. I think some of my colleagues can dance, but I probably can't.
Okay, let's go to the gentleman over there first. Maybe we'll take a few questions for the interest of time. We'll take all three. Maybe you first.
Okay. Hi all. Thank you for today's session. I'm Cohesion, Pubs Director representing NUS Interfaith here. So Minister Shanmugam emphasized how identity politics can marginalize minorities and they in turn can suffer the most. Lee Kuan Yew also said that one man, one vote can put minorities in a captive position. You just mentioned about societal guardrails to protect minorities. So I would like to ask, right, as mentioned by some questioners here as well, that how might we be able to go beyond the usual variables of race, language, religion in protecting minorities, both religious and non-religious, so that each to their own, they live their lives and have their own forms of lives without one bullying another. So like, even non-religious minorities like sexual and gender minorities, and since it's Purple Parade, which I'm going right after, neuroatypicals. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, Minister. So I'm Ramirez. I'm currently serving NS in SDF. So my question is regarding the fact that a lot of Singapore's policies are undergirded in the CMIO model, right? Given the increasing prevalence of, let's say, interracial marriages, or maybe people who may be first-generation migrants who don't necessarily fit into the other category, do you think that there should be any rework of the CMIO model in order to keep up to date with developments across our population demographic?
Thank you. Ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Minister. So I'm...
Sorry, I heard first.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, now, okay.
Okay, I'm Tan Mai. I'm a social sciences undergraduate at NTU. So my question is similar to the previous question, but it's in relation to the EIP policy. Understanding that there's a tighter housing market at the moment, and that the EIP policy can pose certain challenges for certain households of ethnic minorities. Seeing as we have more interracial families and identities that no longer neatly fit our CMIO model, how does the government view this shift, and what are some policies being implemented or in the works to reflect this growing diversity while we continue to strengthen social cohesion, especially in our shared public spaces? Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sui Kim, and I'm actually a student now in NUS in the Distinguished Senior Fellows Program. We have quite a number of friends from other parts of ASEAN, also China, who are our classmates. So these are mostly like 50 years old, 67. We even have one 82-year-old person. Wow. So we're all going towards the 100-year-old life. My question is that I think one of the agendas we have is also strengthening our ASEAN identity. So if you can share your perspective into how we should be growing with this Singaporean identity and then this ASEAN, because we're looking at the economic forces between ASEAN, India, China, Europe, Africa, USA, perhaps. If there's any advice and tips that you can provide. Thank you.
Okay, we have 4 sets of questions. Maybe I start off with the first set of questions regarding guardrails. And I would say that it is true that when we think about the impact of a divided society, the risk of identity politics, that these will have a bigger negative impact on minority groups. And the reason is this, because as I mentioned earlier, if some parties, some political parties feel that they can succeed in playing identity politics, why stop at the minority groups? Why not use the same approach, identity politics, and appeal to the majority group? Because that's where, in terms of votes, you have even more votes, right? So I think in many places where they play identity politics, you see very quickly that the dynamics will shift towards stirring the majority race, the majority groups in society, because politically those are the moves that will give them greater returns in terms of votes. Okay? And the danger of doing that is then the minority groups may face even greater restrictions and discrimination and disadvantages than what they will otherwise face in a society that promotes equality. So I think this is why we feel if you want to go down this path of trying to divide society, and the minority can be defined, in, as you explained, along different dimensions, not necessarily just race and religion. It can be different types of social fault lines and dimensions, and so that's why we've got to be very careful. I think in Singapore, we want to avoid all that, okay? And instead go down the path of being an inclusive society where, we think we may accept that we come from different religions, different ethnic groups, but what binds us together is we're all Singaporeans. And there are many things that we share, many common experiences that we go through, even though we may still have some differences in our respective areas. But we then go one step further and say, even in those areas where we are different, we are interested to learn more about what other Singaporeans, what are their experiences, what are their cultures, what are their traditions. And then I think if you can do that, Singapore as a whole, all of us will find this society, our lives, our experiences to be more diverse, more interesting. And I think that's something which is beneficial to all Singaporeans. Guardrails are important for all of us. I think everybody has a responsibility to uphold social cohesion and multiracialism. It is not just to protect the minorities, it's also to protect the majority race too. What good does it do if in a society the minorities don't feel that they are part of society, we don't have social cohesion? In such a society, I don't think the majority race benefits as well. So this responsibility of upholding cohesion, multiracialism, harmony, I think is the responsibility of all of us, regardless of whether you come from a majority group, I use group rather than race, because it can be different dimensions, or you come from a minority group. I think all of us have a responsibility to help one another as a society to uphold these important values. The second set of questions and the third set of questions are related, so maybe I'll take them together. Yeah, it is true that I think many of us would have family members, friends who come from families where it's mixed race. And this idea of CMIO, over time, the boundaries also become less and less clear. And we shouldn't, like many other policy areas, assume that something is cast in stone and will never change. I think like many other policies, the CMIO construct is something which we will have to take a look at and over time, refine it, adjust it to make sure that it suits what we need. I think that's important. But how to make those moves, what kind of changes we want to make, I think those are important discussions that we need to have before we make them. Because they can be quite sensitive. The consequences can be quite serious if we make the wrong moves. So I think a more careful, deliberate, purposeful kind of process and approach will be required. But certainly, I think we shouldn't say this is cast in stone and you will never change, because our society is changing. And our policies must evolve together with our society, with our needs. The part about housing, I just want to clarify, it is not tighter if you are applying for BTO flats or sale of balance flats, because for those where we build and we allocate balloting and everything, I don't think it is tighter for the minorities. What is the impact of the EIP policy in affecting, in most cases, it will be the minorities, because they are trying to sell their flat after minimum occupation period. Then that's the part where if there's no EIP, I can sell to anyone. If there's EIP and my buyer, my potential buyer, happens to come from an ethnic group that would then mean that this transaction will go past the limit, then I'm restricted. So yes, the scenario that I mentioned earlier is the most common. That means minority homeowner trying to sell to a Chinese buyer. That is the most common, because most of the buyers, by definition, right, because the Chinese make up the largest group of buyers, so therefore, in the population, and therefore most of the buyers are Chinese. So by having this policy, you do face restrictions in some cases. But there are cases also where the Indian family, for example, trying to sell to a Malay family, but they couldn't because the Malay quota has been reached in some areas. So it's not always Chinese. The EIP policy sometimes also affect other ethnic groups as well. But no matter which ethnic group it affects, I accept that the EIP policy, when it comes to selling your flat in the resale market, does impose some restrictions on the seller. And so therefore, we have to bear that in mind. And that's why a few years ago, Minister Desmond Lee and the MND team introduced this new policy, which is to say, if after trying to sell the flat in the open market for some time and you couldn't succeed, HDB will buy it back from you. So as to give our home sellers who are facing such a situation at least a way out, that they can move forward. Otherwise, they are stuck and they can't sell their flat. Yeah, so that's what we want to do. But when it comes to BTO flats, when it comes to sale or balance flat, the key is actually to build more and to build faster, because we have strong demand for BTO flats regardless of race, language, or religion. All Singaporeans are telling us that we should continue with this robust supply of BTO flats. And if you look at the latest round in October, of course, different projects have different subscription rate. Some are more oversubscribed than others. But overall, if you look at the number of flats offered and the number of people who apply, we still have quite strong demand. So this is something which I think we need to continue to do to have a robust, continued supply of new flats that can meet the needs of different groups of buyers. First-time buyers, families, singles, seniors, second-time buyers. We want to build more. We want to build faster. Now, the last set of questions about ASEAN identity. If I may maybe take a step back. If you take a look at Europe, which has gone some years ahead of us in terms of regional integration, even for them, I think if you tell a French that you are the same as a German or Italian, I think they will feel quite upset, right? So even for the Europeans, which have gone some way in terms of integration, economic integration, common market, common currency, the sense of identity is still very local, still very strong. Food, culture, language, traditions. So I think for ASEAN, we are at least a few steps behind compared to the Europeans when it comes to economic integration. So if you ask me, I would put to you that maybe the first step is not so much to push for a common ASEAN identity, which I think will be quite difficult, but to push for more economic integration, which is what we need. So if you look at the front page of Straits Times today, there's an article that says that the ASEAN countries are now going to sign the digital economy agreement, right? So I mean, things like that where we can do business even though we may speak Vietnamese, Thai, Bahasa, we can still do business together because that is the common language. We can trade, we can help one another with investments to grow our job markets, to make ASEAN a good place for investors to come, to create more jobs for our people, to also invest in the green and sustainability solutions that we need, including my own hope that we will be able to realize this, the ASEAN Power Grid.
Great, thank you, Minister. And thank you, everyone, for your participation. We have run out of time. We'd like to thank Minister for his comments and his reflections.
Thank you very much. Thank you.